All right, I'll marry him. When Sophie dropped those words, she suddenly felt liberated. Her parents' chuckles, full of amusement, echoed in her ears. Sophie, it's awesome you've come around. Even though your fiancé is in a coma, he's pretty handsome, and if he wakes up, he'll take over the family business. Parents pushing their own daughter to marry someone in a coma, thinking she's getting an upper hand. There's probably no other duo like them out there. Sophie couldn't help but laugh at herself. Don't sweat it. Now that I've decided to marry him, I'm not backing out. I won't let your beloved adopted daughter take my spot. What are you saying? You're our real daughter. We care about Helen, but, both Jack and Noah are into her. It wouldn't be right for her to marry him. Now that the family's planning the wedding, Sophie, get ready. In 2 weeks, they'll come to pick you up to head to New York. Sophie's parents added a few more lines before hanging up. Staring at the dimming screen, Sophie couldn't help but glance at the photos on the table. Her parents, her brother, and her boyfriend surrounded her. The princess attire, crown on her head, all showing pure adoration. Back then, everyone said, "Who wouldn't want to be Sophie?" People envied her, parents treating her like royalty, a brother who adored her endlessly, and a boyfriend solely focused on her. Sophie thought she'd be happy forever like this. It wasn't until she turned 18 that she found out she was bound to an arranged marriage. Her grandfather had set it up while he was alive, but Sophie and her childhood friend Noah were already in love, so her family planned to call off the engagement once she reached adulthood. However, her fiancé Henry had an accident and ended up in a coma. To dodge the shame of being labeled traitors, the family decided to stick to the agreement. Yet they couldn't bear the thought of their precious daughter caring for someone in a coma. So they struggled with it. Finally, they devised a plan. They adopted a daughter to take Sophie's place. That's how Helen, who grew up in an orphanage and lived on the streets, became part of Sophie's family. Feeling guilty about Helen taking Sophie's spot, Sophie's family went all out to pamper her. Her parents gave her a $500,000 allowance every month. Jack bought her endless luxury items daily, and Noah catered to her every whim. Even Sophie sacrificed everything for Helen. Helen wanted Sophie's room. She gave it up. Helen wanted her trophies. She let her have them. Helen needed a kidney due to renal failure, and Sophie agreed to donate hers. But what Sophie didn't foresee was Helen's unscrupulous nature. After moving in, Helen constantly framed Sophie and within 5 years managed to steal all the attention and affection. Both her brother and childhood friend fell for Helen. Even her parents suggested, albeit reluctantly, that Sophie herself should honor the marriage contract because they couldn't let Helen marry into such a situation. Sophie wasn't one to break her word. At first, it was just tough to part with Noah and her tight-knit family, but now that they favored Helen, she figured she might as well go through with the marriage. After all, it was her engagement to begin with. Keeping her parents' timeline in mind, Sophie marked a red circle on the calendar half a month away and wrote leave. Then she headed upstairs. Just then, the front door swung open, and her brother Jack and childhood friend Noah stood there. They rushed upstairs, and before Sophie could react, they shoved her down the stairs. As Sophie tumbled, her head slammed hard onto the ground, leaving her battered and bleeding. Excruciating pain shot through her body, cold sweat pouring out, yet the two above didn't bother helping her up. Instead, they pulled out their phones to video chat with Helen. "Helen, did you see us push Sophie down the stairs? Now you should believe you mean more to us. Stop acting up. Come back, okay?" Hearing this, Sophie, lying in a pool of her blood, with eyes wide in shock, realized they only hurt her to show runaway Helen that she was more important. On the screen, Helen was moved to tears. "Jack, Noah, I believe you now. I won't throw a fit anymore. I'll be back soon." Relieved, the two men sighed. After Helen hung up, they finally rushed downstairs. "Sophie, does it hurt? Helen said she didn't feel secure, and we had to prove it to her. We're sorry." She stormed out in a rage, and they were worried, so they had to put you in this position. Sophie was in too much pain to respond. The two men panicked and were about to take her to the hospital when Helen called again, sounding fragile. "Jack, Noah, I'm such a fool. I can't find my way home." The two men heard this and grew anxious. They hung up and hurried to get her, but before leaving, they looked at Sophie lying on the ground. "Sophie? Helen's lost. We're afraid something might happen to her. Can you get to the hospital by yourself?" And with that, They left her without a second thought. Sophie watched them leave, her pain unbearable. She struggled to dial 911. With the last bit of strength she had, blood from the wound on the back of her head kept soaking her clothes, staining them red. Before passing out completely, one last thought crossed her mind. After this, there won't be any after. In half a month, she would leave the city, whether sophisticated or unrefined. A clean break from everyone. When Sophie opened her eyes again, it was dark. She glanced around the empty hospital room, a hint of mockery in her eyes. A nurse came over with test results, gave a brief update on her condition, and told her she'd be discharged tomorrow. Looking over her medical files, Sophie's phone was buzzing nonstop. It was Helen's messages. She sent dozens of pictures, showing off nonstop. Noah's messages too. Pictures of Noah carrying her home, Jack wearing an apron while cooking for her, the two men dotingly surrounding her, piled high with gifts at their feet. Sis, Jack and Noah spoil me so much. I'm seriously the happiest girl in the world. Sophie glanced over, but didn't reply to any messages. After resting for a night, she finally got discharged and headed home. As soon as she walked in, she saw the three of them sitting together watching a movie. Two guys on either side, with Jack feeding her fruit and Noah handing her a drink. The horrifying bloodstains on the floor had already been cleaned up, and no one seemed to care. Sophie looked away and quietly went to her room. She took out a box and started packing things into it to throw away. Once it was full, she carried it outside. Soon, a fire started outside, catching Noah and Jack's attention. They realized something was wrong and got up to check, just in time to see Sophie standing by a big fire pit, tossing things in. Both guys felt a heavy weight in their hearts. "Sophie, what are you doing?" Sophie didn't answer. She just picked up a veil from the box and looked at Noah. "Noah, you gave this to me when you were 7. Back then we played house, and you insisted I could only be your bride. You gave me this veil, saying it'd be for our future wedding." With that, Sophie tossed it into the fire without hesitation. The next second, amidst everyone's shocked stares, she took out a safety charm. "Brother, you gave this to me when you were 15. I was sickly and always had fevers, and you couldn't bear it. You heard health prayers at the Xiangshan temple, worked and climbed thousands of steps, bowing at each one, praying for my health and safety." Again, Sophie threw it into the fire without a second thought. Next was Noah's love letter, then a pair of crystal shoes Jack gave her, followed by a princess dress from Noah. As she set all these memories ablaze, not even sparing the photos from her childhood, Noah couldn't hold back anymore. He rushed over and grabbed her hand. "Sophie, I know you're still mad about yesterday, but Helen's adopted. She doesn't have much security as it is. Soon she'll be marrying into the Purr family for you, and those good times are numbered. You owe her. Must you really fight with her over this?" Jack looked at her with disappointment and a hint of anger. "Sophie, it's just a little cut on your head. Helen's losing her whole life's happiness. Looks like Helen was right. You really are spoiled and not half as sensible as her." Sophie shook her head. "No, you're wrong. It's her marrying into the Purr family, not Helen." Looking at the fading embers and ashes on the ground, she turned and went back to her room without a word of explanation. The next morning, as Sophie was about to leave, she spotted a stack of gift boxes piled by the door. She knew these were from Noah and Jack. Usually when they upset her, they wouldn't let her stay upset another day. Jack would stand by her door with red eyes saying, "Sister, if you don't forgive me, I won't leave." Noah would show up with a mountain of gifts, pitifully saying, "Sophie, if you're still mad, just hit me, yell at me, but please don't hurt yourself." But now, neither had come, only a heap of cold, lifeless items. But Sophie didn't care. She gave a bitter smile and tossed everything into the trash can. Helen, just up from bed, feigned shock upon seeing this, covering her mouth. "Why'd you throw it all away, sis? Do you look down on these gifts?" "Oh, I've told Jack and Noah you've been spoiled since birth, and would surely dismiss this. I advised them to give you the originals I have, but they insisted on me keeping them. I'm just a poor, friendless adopted girl, after all, while you're the heiress. Yet they treat me so well." Sophie pulled a small smile. "Well, congratulations. This home is all yours now." With that, she ignored Helen's baffled and confused look and left. Over the weekend, Sophie took a trip to a tranquil temple. She'd heard this place was quite sacred, so she intended to pray for her fiancé in the family. He was once a brilliant person, adored by all, but a car accident turned him into a coma patient for 5 long years. Since she was marrying into the family, they would share both glory and downfall. She'd do whatever it took to wake him, and if he didn't, she would care for him a lifetime, no one else. Step by step, she bowed in devout prayer. As she bowed halfway up the mountain, she ran into some familiar faces. Noah and Jack's knees were scraped and bleeding, but they kept Helen safe between them, fearful she'd fall. None of them expected to see her there, each one shocked. Helen, with tears welling, clutched the 2 red strings around her neck. Her voice choked. Sis, Noah and Jack heard this temple's the most sacred, so they insisted on praying for me. Look at their legs. Sophie ignored her, continuing her devoted prayers, climbing 1 step at a time, silently pleading, Dear heavens, please bless my husband to awaken. May he have a life of peace and joy. Watching her sincere devotion to prayer, the 3 were stunned. Jack couldn't hold back, grabbing her. You've been used to a life of ease. Why are you doing this? The top of this mountain is nearly 10,000 steps up. Are you planning to kneel all the way? Unless someone saved your life, nobody's worth you going through this. Sophie laughed. So she saved both your lives? Noah instinctively denied. Helen's different. She's the one I care about most. He once said at 17, during his confession, Noah loves only Sophie. Yet now, the one I care most about is Helen. Sophie laughed with tears. Yes, and the one I'm praying for is who matters most to me. With that, she pulled her hand free, circled around them, and knelt to climb another step. Seeing her unwavering resolve, Jack's voice was filled with a conflicting mix of emotions. He finally sighed. I get it. You're praying for me, right? Just stop. Your brother doesn't need you to suffer. Noah's gaze was full of tenderness. Sophie, either do I. Let it go. But Sophie said nothing. She gave them a cool glance, turned towards the distant peak, and continued her ascent. Seeing her so resolute, both Jack and Noah were shaken, and for the first time, they momentarily ignored Helen and couldn't help but follow her up the mountain. Time ticked away, and as evening approached, they finally reached the destination. Sophie, with her knees covered in blood, struggled over to the wishing tree. She grabbed a red ribbon and wrote a name on it. 2 men arriving just after her saw Henry on the ribbon and felt their hearts tighten. Henry, not Jack, not Noah. Who the heck is that? Sophie had just placed the ribbon in the talisman when Noah grabbed her hand, angrily. He could allow Sophie to do it for her brother, but would not tolerate other men. Sophie didn't get it. Just earlier, he said Helen was the most important person to him. So why the jealousy and intensity now? As Sophie was about to speak, Helen suddenly tripped and fell. Ouch! Seeing Helen fall, Noah and Jack rushed over, not caring to hear any explanation. Helen, with tears in her eyes, refused their help. Jack, Noah, you're both hurt too. Just leave me be. Then she glanced at Sophie. Sis, could you help me rest for a while? Without waiting for Sophie's response, she leaned on Sophie immediately. Sophie instinctively wanted to push her away, but with no energy left, she had no choice but to let Helen support herself on her. After passing through a gate, Helen pulled Sophie aside, her weak appearance shifting to one of defiance. Sophie, don't think some cheap tactics will catch their attention. Dream on. Sophie couldn't figure out what Helen's game was. Before she could say anything, Helen raised her hand and slapped herself a few times, wailing loudly. Sis, I'm sorry. Please don't hit me. I won't fight you for Jack and Noah anymore. Please let me go. The loud commotion quickly drew Jack and Noah's attention, just a few steps away. When they arrived, they saw Helen's tear-streaked face and the marks there. Jack, fuming, rushed over and roughly pushed Sophie. She couldn't steady herself and fell, hitting the flower bed, blood immediately pouring from her forehead. Noah was boiling with anger, instantly blaming her. Sophie, Helen's had a rough life. Orphaned for years. In our house, she's just a foster child. You've had everything since you were a kid. Why target her? The wedding's being arranged, just days left. Why compete with her now? Noah, don't hold back. She's getting worse by the day. Sophie, you always harass Helen. I can't believe you're my sister, so cruel. Jack added. Sophie thought she'd grown numb to pain, but their words cut deep, fueled with accusations, pushing her over the edge. It wasn't me. She did it herself. There are cameras. Before she finished, Helen clutched her tear-stained face, crying, Jack, Noah, my face hurts so much. Will I be scarred? And what's this about marriage? Where am I going? Hearing this, the men visibly shifted. Noah was quick, scooping her up. Nothing to worry about. I'll get you to the hospital. Jack chimed in. Helen, you misheard. We'll get the best doctor for you. Listening to the fading footsteps, tears finally flowed for Sophie as she tightly held the amulet. They were wrong. Jack, Noah, you are all wrong. The one marrying into the Per family is her Sophie. It was kind strangers who took Sophie to the hospital. It was her second time hurt, and the doctor couldn't restrain his lecture, asking if she cared for herself at all. She couldn't say that these wounds came courtesy of the two men most important to her. Helen then sent her a video in between. Opening it, her voice sounded so pitiful. Sis is hurt next door. Jack, Noah, go check on her. It's lonely otherwise. Jack peeled her fruit, dismissively. Helen, you're too kind. Letting her suffer a bit might teach her a lesson. Noah, passing her some water gently, sighed. I can't spare time for her right now. Can't spare time for her, Sophie cried, a laugh escaping between the tears. After discharge, Sophie locked herself in her room, refusing to go out. Her parents returned from their trip on her birthday, nudging her downstairs, finally. The living room buzzed, preparing for the birthday party later. Sophie's parents smiled, giving 2 dresses to their daughters. For Helen, it was a brand new haute couture, sparkling with diamonds worth millions. Sophie's dress was an outdated starry dress from years ago. Anyone could spot the bias, but her parents gave reasons, saying it suited their daughter's complexion better. Nearby, maids whispered under their breath, Is Sophie really their daughter? It's her birthday, but they give the fancy dress to the foster kid? The maids speculated away. Sophie silently listened, taking everything back to her room. Everyone assumed Helen was the one to marry into the Per family. She was the only one who knew she was the one getting married, not Sophie. I mean, who could imagine that her real parents would abandon their own daughter in favor of the adopted one, right? The party kicked off right on time at 6 in the evening. As soon as Helen stepped in, all eyes were on her, and folks rushed over to congratulate her. Helen, you look stunning today, totally the star of the show. I've been trying to get this dress forever and couldn't. Your folks really adore you. Everyone was busy praising her, forgetting that the real birthday girl was Sophie. Sophie didn't say a word. She just sat quietly on the couch, looking at the enormous fruitcake and the seafood spread. All of it Helen's favorites, but unfortunately for Sophie, she was allergic to mango and seafood, so she didn't eat a thing the whole night. When it was time for the group to sing the birthday song at 8, everyone gathered around Helen, and even the gifts went to her. Sophie's parents generously gifted a pricey villa, located smack dab in the city center, to Helen. Jack handed over half of his shares in the company to her. Noah presented a multi-million-dollar necklace he recently acquired at auction. The necklace, symbolizing true love, sparkled and stirred quite the chatter. Does this mean they're about to get hitched? Noah wants to marry Helen, huh? Among the buzzing crowd, Sophie quietly stood in a corner. It felt like she was invisible. The lively scene had nothing to do with her. After the cake was cut, upbeat piano music filled the room, and the good-looking guests headed for the dance floor. Helen scanned the crowd, spotted Sophie, and approached her with a smug grin. Sis, it must sting to be overshadowed at your own birthday party, huh? But nothing you can do. Mom, Dad, Jack, and Noah all adore me more. Even though you're their real daughter, you're still under my heel. Look at you, how pathetic. Sophie knew Helen was trying to get under her skin, but she ran out of tears years ago. She just looked at her with a blank expression. Helen tossed in a few more jabs, but when they didn't stick, she stomped off. Feeling weary from sitting too long, Sophie just wanted to go home and rest. After all, she wasn't the star of this party, not at all. Just as she was about to leave, Helen, surrounded by the crowd, screamed, "Oh no! Noah's multi-million-dollar necklace is gone. There's a thief here!" Sophie glanced back, and sure enough, Helen's neck was bare. Oddly, she had a bad feeling. As if on cue, tears welled up in Helen's eyes. I was just talking to Sophie, and now the necklace is missing. Sis, if you wanted it so bad, why didn't you just say so instead of stealing it? The room's eyes pinned on Sophie. Taking a deep breath, she met their accusatory stares with calm determination and firmly stated, "It's not me. I'm from a wealthy family. Why would I need to steal a necklace?" Her confident stance eased much of the suspicion. Though Noah looked doubtful, Helen wouldn't let it go, insisting, "If not you, then who else? Maybe the necklace isn't a big deal to you, but Noah gave it. You have a thing for him, don't you? How could you resist? If you're so innocent, then let them search you." A public search? Clenching her fists, Sophie coldly refused. "I said I don't have it, and I'm not letting you search me. Mom, Dad, Jack, I'm telling the truth. Don't you believe me? Mom, Dad, Jack, I'm telling the truth." "Noah, I know I'm just the adopted one, but it doesn't matter for anything else. Whatever my sister wants, I'll give. But this was from you. I can't give this one up." Watching her cry, they were all moved, and in the end, Jack nodded to the bodyguards. Seeing this, they stepped forward and grabbed Sophie. Horrified, Sophie looked at him. He was her real brother. Yet he was about to strip her bare in front of everyone for the adopted sister. Struggling and shouting it wasn't her. Nobody listened. Her elegant gown was torn to shreds, her hair pulled from its style, clumps yanked out as she clawed to cover herself, her eyes filled with pain. No matter how she struggled or explained, people watched as if it was entertainment. Watching her parents' cold faces, along with Noah and Jack, only concerned with comforting Helen, Sophie felt trapped in a nightmare. Her once protective parents and brother who stood up for her were gone. Noah, who shielded her from hardships, had changed too. As her dress was about to be completely ripped off, tears of agony blurred her vision. In despair, something clicked. She raised her bleeding nails and shouted with all her strength, "It's not me. I've got a recording." The room fell silent. Helen's face went pale. Wobbling to her feet, Sophie remembered. Since Helen framed her last time, she'd been cautious, embedding a camera in her earrings. Quickly, she took the earring out, projecting it on the big screen. The footage clearly showed Helen slipping the necklace into Sophie's dress. Her malicious taunts were revealed too. The tense atmosphere flipped in an instant. Everyone looked at Helen with disgust. Hair messy, hands trembling, Sophie fumbled for her phone, her face resolute. "Hello? Police? Someone tried to set me up here." The words made Helen twitch in shock, bursting into tears. "I didn't mean it, Sophie. It was just a prank. Why are you making such a big deal?" Watching her cry, Sophie's family and Noah rushed to comfort her, giving Sophie a scornful look. Their dissatisfaction was obvious. Helen said it was just a little joke. "Why can't you let it go? She's so kind and pure. There's no way she could have done something like framing someone." The authenticity of that surveillance footage is still up for discussion. All right, let's end this farce here. Why call the cops over something so minor? Let's end this farce here. Why call the cops over something so minor? Aren't you embarrassed? As they talked, they protected Helen and escorted her out of the hall. Watching them hurry back, Sophie truly felt what it means to be deserted by everyone. She laughed silently, her body cold and trembling uncontrollably. In the days that followed, Sophie stayed inside, just waiting to get married as soon as possible. She never thought that one day, the home that once showered her with immense love would become the place she most wanted to escape from. One day while packing her things, she heard some loud commotion outside the villa. She opened the window and saw Helen driving a car in the spacious garden, with Noah smiling beside her, teaching her eagerly. Jack stood by the roadside, gently instructing her to park in the garage. Watching the three of them having such a good time, a flash of blankness crossed Sophie's eyes. Back then, when she was learning to drive, they both taught her too. It was winter and freezing. Afraid she'd catch a cold, Noah would hold her hand after each drive, warming it against his chest. Jack, on the other hand, recorded the whole process despite the cold wind and stayed up late to note down important points for her. But that was a long, long time ago. Sophie lowered her eyes, hiding her self-mocking expression. In the afternoon, she planned to meet some friends to say goodbye, and after packing up, she intended to head out. Just as she stepped out, a car suddenly hit her hard. Her whole body was thrown several meters away, landing on the hard stone road with a thud. She vomited blood in large gulps. Her body felt like it was falling apart, and the bone-chilling pain pulled at her nerves from every direction. In a blur, she saw Helen step out of the car with a smile. "Oh, Sophie, oops, I just learned to drive and accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake. Sorry for running into you. Seeing all that blood, you must be in a lot of pain. I should call for an ambulance right away." "Oh no, what's the number for the ambulance?" "Maybe I should dial all the numbers, but that'll take time. Hang in there, sis." In the end, before Helen managed to call an ambulance, Sophie passed out. She lay there for half an hour before Noah found her and got her to the hospital. After a day and night of unconsciousness, she finally woke up, but her chest hurt badly with 3 broken ribs. She was so weak with no strength, even breathing was unbearably painful. Sophie's parents stayed right by her side, their faces filled with unbearable heartache. Jack was constantly asking the doctor for ways to ease her pain. Noah held her hand tightly, wiping the cold sweat off her forehead. After this accident, it seemed like everyone's attention shifted back to Sophie, but she knew deep down they weren't there just to care for her. "Sophie, the doctor says the pain is temporary. Hold on, it'll get better soon. Helen didn't mean it, so forgive her, will you? It's all my fault for not teaching her well, so you can blame me instead. We're family. It was just an accident, so don't dwell on it. Focus on getting better, Sophie." All morning, Sophie heard these words over and over. Their eyes were clearly filled with worry, yet every word seemed to be excusing Helen. Whether it was physical pain or heartache, she couldn't stop her tears. Everyone in the room blurred into a haze of shadows, indistinct and unclear. Maybe pain was causing her hallucinations. Memories floated in her mind. Her parents used to rush in a doctor to bandage even the smallest cut on her hand. Her brother would take the same medicines to comfort her, knowing she hated them. And Noah, who never left her side when she sprained her ankle, not letting her take a single extra step. None of that remains now. Seeing her cry, Noah got a jolt of panic and raised his hand to wipe her tears, just as a nurse came in. "There's a girl outside who fainted from too much emotion. Someone go check on her." Hearing that Helen had fainted, everyone left abruptly to rush to her. What was once a noisy room went completely quiet in just a moment. Sophie's tears flowed more fiercely. She cried and cried until she fell asleep unknowingly. When she awoke, the room remained silent, and the tremendous pain in her body hadn't eased. Her phone blinked with incoming messages from Helen. "You got hurt worse, yet everyone's worried about me. Sophie, you're just a joke." There was a video where Noah offered her a bowl of porridge, blowing it cold and feeding her. Jack was telling stupid jokes to cheer her up. Sophie's parents tucked her into bed. In the minute-long video, everyone encircled Helen, comforting her nonstop. "Helen, we know you didn't mean it. Your sister won't blame you. Don't feel guilty. Your sadness makes us feel bad too. Stop crying. It'll make your eyes all puffy and not pretty. Sophie only needs a few days rest. She's fine. Don't worry, all right?" Every word felt like a needle stabbing deep into Sophie's heart. She closed her eyes tightly, holding back her tears, her nails digging deep into her palms. At that moment, a single thought lingered in her mind. On the day she gets married, none of them should come. A week later, Sophie was discharged from the hospital. Doctors advised her to stay a while longer, but she shook her head. She couldn't wait any longer. Today she was supposed to head to New York to get married. Returning home, the villa was empty. Only her phone buzzed nonstop with taunting messages from Helen. She ignored them. In the morning, when Helen sent photos of Sophie's parents taking her to an amusement park, laughing together on the merry-go-round, Sophie sat at a table and wrote a letter severing all family ties. She placed it in her parents' room. "From now on, I'm no longer your daughter, and I have no parents or brother anymore." Around noon, after Helen sent her a video of Jack giving her a piggyback ride and promising to cherish her for a lifetime, Sophie called a few gardeners and had all the tulips in the backyard removed. Every single one of those tulips had been lovingly planted by Jack after he found out she loved them, and he attended to them for over a decade. He once said that wherever she got married, the tulips would be transplanted there, as they symbolized his love for her as a brother. But now, she didn't want this brother anymore. In the evening, when Helen sent her a recording of Noah lighting up fireworks for her by the river, declaring she was always the most important person to him, Sophie delivered a box to Noah's house. Inside was a family heirloom Noah had given her when he was 17. She had joked back then, saying he gave her the heirloom so early. Wasn't he afraid of future changes? Sophie, the young man, had said, his eyes full of warmth as he held her close. "The only person I want to marry in this life is you. If not, I won't marry anyone." Now, she was getting married, but the groom was no longer him. After doing all this, the sound of a car engine suddenly came from outside the door. Sophie opened the door to find a middle-aged man in a suit standing there. "Hello, Miss Sophie. I'm the butler of the Purr family, here to take you to New York." Sophie nodded politely, picking up the luggage next to her. "Let's go." The butler took her luggage, glancing at the empty house. "Do you need to say goodbye to your family?" Los Angeles and New York were miles apart, and she'd be marrying into a prestigious family. Who knew when she'd see them again? Sophie shook her head and got straight into the car. "Drive. No need. No need ever again. Because starting today, I have no family." In the dark night, the car drove slowly towards the airport. After a 7-hour flight, Sophie arrived in New York. It was late, but the villa on the hillside was brightly lit. As soon as she got out of the car, she was helped into a wheelchair and wheeled towards the door. From afar, she could see a group of people waiting at the door, making her instantly nervous. The butler kindly introduced everyone to her in advance. "Miss Sophie, just follow Henry's lead. Right in the center is Jennifer. To the left are Henry's parents, Matt and Kate, and to the right are Henry's grandparents. In the back are—" Sophie never expected to meet so many members of the Purr family on her first day there. She tensed up, quickly adjusting her breath and expression. When she was brought in front of them, just as she was about to stand up, the kind Jennifer gently pressed her down. "Sophie, you've had a long journey and you're hurt. There's no need to be formal. Just sit. We heard you were coming to New York and the whole family wanted to see you, so don't be nervous." Yeah, sis-in-law. Hello, I'm Henry's cousin. You can just call me Angela. That's Granny Jennifer." With this little 10-year-old girl helping with introductions, Sophie smoothly greeted everyone from the Purr family. After some small talk, noticing it was almost midnight, everyone dispersed, agreeing to meet again after she had recovered a bit. The maid wheeled Sophie into her bedroom, and Jennifer followed, looking at her face with a nostalgic expression. "Sophie, I held you when you were a baby. Your grandpa joked about engagement then, and young Henry, who adored you, agreed immediately. Later, the Purr family moved back to New York, so we didn't keep in touch much, but Henry always thought about you." Even though she didn't remember childhood events, Sophie could feel the elders' genuine care and lightly squeezed her hand. "Grandma, Grandpa often talked about you, saying you were of Jennifer with a good temper and a lot of authority." The two chatted about the past, gradually opening up and sharing laughter. Before bed, Jennifer fondly patted her head with a cheery smile. "Get a good night's rest. Tomorrow I'll accompany you for a checkup, and then we can visit Henry in the afternoon. All right?" Sophie nodded in agreement, seeing her grandma out the door. After closing the door, she remembered Henry's mom mentioning that everything was ready and turned back to the walk-in closet. There were pajamas, clothes, intimate wear, and socks with cosmetics filling the vanity, and neatly arranged toiletries in the bathroom. Reflecting on everything that happened in just 2 days made it all feel surreal to Sophie. Had she really come to New York to marry into the Purr family? Sophie lay down and soon fell asleep. When she reopened her eyes the next day, it was already 10 o'clock. She quickly got up to wash. In the living room, Jennifer, Matt, and Kate were already there chatting over tea. Seeing her up, they called the kitchen to prepare breakfast and warmly welcomed her. "Sophie, did you sleep well last night? Is there anything special you want to eat? Come down slowly. We know the journey's tiring. Sleeping in is good. There's no rush." Being treated with so much care from seniors she just met was a bit overwhelming for Sophie. Perhaps noticing her discomfort, Jennifer cleverly found tasks to occupy everyone else, casually chatting with Sophie while serving her food. After breakfast, Jennifer took her to the hospital for a thorough checkup. The doctor prescribed new medication, advising her to rest for a month, assuring her of gradual recovery. Relieved by the news, both felt a load lifted off their shoulders. After leaving the hospital, Jennifer took her straight to a countryside rehabilitation center. Sophie knew she was about to see Henry and felt slightly nervous, but then remembered he was still in a coma and relieved herself of the pressure. Upon arrival, Sophie saw the butler, Larry, waiting at the door holding several documents, bowing politely. As they passed, Jennifer specifically asked, "How's Henry doing?" "Same as before. The doctor says he's stable." Jennifer nodded, leading Sophie upstairs. The rooftop luxury suite was heavily guarded and extremely quiet. Medical staff opened the room door for them, and Jennifer warmly greeted those inside. "Henry, look who I brought." Lost in thought over the doctor's instructions, Sophie didn't initially react. Upon hearing her name, she instinctively looked up. She found herself staring right into a pair of calm, undisturbed eyes. Looking at the man in the hospital gown sitting on the couch, Sophie was at a loss for words. Though she tried to remain calm on the outside, her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Wasn't Henry supposed to be in a vegetative state? How was he sitting up, blinking, talking even? Had he woken up? When did this happen? Could it be that the temple they visited actually worked its magic? What should she do now? Say hi? Introduce herself? Jennifer seemed unaware of the crazy thoughts running through Sophie's mind as she led her to the standing Henry. "Sophie, this is Henry. Henry, this is Sophie." Sophie forced a smile and awkwardly extended her right hand. "Hi." Henry looked at her steadily, his gaze flickering slightly, and took her hand in a gentle grip. "Long time no see." Those 4 words left Sophie stunned for a moment, but she quickly recalled that Jennifer mentioned Henry was 4 years her senior and had even held her when she was a child, nearly 20 years ago, and he remembered it so vividly. Shouldn't he have just forgotten all about it by now? Sophie pondered. Jennifer, unable to hide the joy in her voice, led them to sit down. "Henry, Sophie had an accident in Algiers and needs to recuperate for a while. Your recovery program is ending soon, so how about setting the wedding date for June?" Henry fluffed a pillow for his grandma, a faint smile gracing his lips. "If Sophie's okay with it, I'm fine with whatever Grandma decides." Sophie had come to New York for the wedding, so she naturally had no objections. With a long-standing wish finally coming true, Jennifer was overjoyed and chatted with the pair for half an hour. Just as Larry came in with some documents, Jennifer took him out, saying she'd start arranging the wedding details they'd just discussed. Now it was just Henry and Sophie in the room. Sophie wasn't sure what to say and picked up a magazine from the table. Henry, more at ease, poured a glass of water and handed it to her. "Grandma mentioned you got injured. Was it a car accident? How's your health?" "A car accident. Broke a few ribs, but I'll recover in about a month." Henry frowned slightly, wanting to ask more about her injuries, but sensing the reluctance in her eyes. He realized she might not want to discuss it and changed the subject. "What about your parents? Didn't they come to New York?" This question caught Sophie off guard for a second, but she knew he was probably just making small talk to keep things from getting awkward, so she gave a vague answer. "They are on a business trip, so I came alone." Sophie's words and her expression were giving Henry vibes that something wasn't quite right. Not wanting to leave a bad first impression, he decided to give her the lead. "My family can be pretty enthusiastic. Being new here, you might have questions. Can I help with anything?" Sophie had prepared for him to ask something that might touch a nerve, so his sudden change of topic surprised her. She looked up, taken aback. Seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she blurted out a question that had been puzzling her. "When did you wake up?" Henry knew exactly what she was curious about and laid it all out. 2 months ago, March 15th, in the evening to be exact. We kept it under wraps because of all the follow-up tests and rehab. March? That rang bells for Sophie. Around then, her parents revived the topic of her engagement. The day Helen came to their house, it was like her family and Noah all agreed she should marry into the Peer family. For 5 years, there was radio silence from the Peer family, and slowly everyone forgot about the arrangement. 2 months ago, her parents held a hush-hush family meeting and brought it up again. They slyly tried to stop Helen's potential marriage swap, making Sophie realize she couldn't outdo Helen. Despite their decade-long relationship, Sophie had clung to some false hopes. Then, around 3 weeks ago, Helen purposely picked a fight by killing the dog Sophie had raised for 10 years, like a family member. It broke her, but everyone around her defended Helen. That was when Sophie lost hope and buried the dog. She resolved to leave. The two young people spent the afternoon chatting, breaking the ice. Sophie was no longer as tense as when she'd first arrived and began asking about the pair family's liked preferences. Henry guessed she wanted to prepare some gifts and gave a slight smile. Lots of relatives in my family, and I can't remember everything off the top of my head. We'll think it through. How about we spend some time shopping for gifts for everyone once I'm out of the hospital next week, and I'll show you around. Already getting out in a week? That soon? Sophie showed a hint of surprise. She thought his suggestion was pretty solid, given her unfamiliarity with the place, and nodded in agreement. Soon it got dark, and Jennifer came to pick her up. Sophie waved Henry goodbye. Watching them drive off, Henry gave Larry 2 orders. Find out how exactly the lady of the house got injured, and if you can, dig into what's been going on with Sophie's family lately. Ask their staff if you get the chance. On the way back, Jennifer couldn't stop smiling, chatting with Sophie. Sophie, did you have a good chat with Henry? What do you think of him? The straightforward question caught Sophie off guard. After a moment, she gave a cautiously considered response. We had a great conversation. He's really nice, very considerate. We even plan to go shopping together soon. Seeing the young couple getting along so well, Jennifer felt a ton of relief. She held Sophie's hand and warmly advised her, Sophie, I know you might feel a bit uneasy just arriving here, but it's all good. Henry's parents like you a lot, and so do his grandparents, and even his little cousin, Angela. Treat this place like your own home. Say what's on your mind, buy whatever you need, and let me know if anything's bothering you. I promised your grandpa years ago, regardless of whether you marry into the Purr family or not. You're like a granddaughter to me. With that, Jennifer pulled out a black card from her pocket, placing it into Sophie's hand. This is a red packet Grandma's been saving for over 20 years, and it's finally yours today. Your grandpa gave Henry one when the time came, so you must accept it too. Seeing the gentle smile on Jennifer's face, Sophie felt a lump in her throat. Before coming to New York, she imagined how the Purr family would treat her. She even prepared for them to call off the engagement once they knew about the arranged marriage. But when she got there and saw everyone, young and old, waiting up till midnight to welcome her, their care for her health left her with mixed emotions. The warmth and care she didn't get from her own family, she felt from these strangers she'd just met. Turns out, when things seem hopeless, they might lead to a new beginning. Sophie was moved, her eyes glistening with tears. Jennifer quickly pulled out a handkerchief, gently wiping her tears, soothing her softly. Don't cry, okay? Kate cooked something special tonight. Let's go try it and see if you like it. During the week in Bali, Sophie's family and Noah seemed to forget all about her. On the flight back, Helen couldn't sleep and insisted on opening all the gift boxes. Jack and Noah, who usually gave in to her whims, surprisingly refused, coaxing her to wait a few more days. Helen pouted. Not letting me see, huh? Must be some gift for Sophie's sister. I knew you two were biased against me. Seeing her upset, the two were flustered, hesitating. The truth was, the gifts were meant for Helen. They knew she would have to marry into the Purr family once they returned, so they wanted to make this time special. They had decided to make this week of happiness count to fulfill her every wish, keeping her happy before the wedding. However, Helen was clueless about the arranged marriage. They didn't know how to tell her, worrying about her reaction, hoping nothing else would go wrong. Jack, unable to hold it anymore, wanted to come clean. Helen, actually, those things are gifts for you after you return home. But Helen, in a huff, covered her ears and stormed off to the bathroom. Seeing her stubborn back, they sighed in defeat. Sophie's parents, aware of their worries, took this opportunity to tell the pair a few things. No need to feel down. Helen won't be marrying into the Purr family, so relax. Hearing this, Jack and Noah were in disbelief, then pure joy. Uncle, Auntie, is that true? The Purr family agreed to call off the wedding? Wow, that's fantastic news. Let's celebrate tonight with Sophie. Hearing Sophie's name, the old couple paused. The father wanted to share the truth, but the mother stopped him, whispering in his ear, "Better not tell them yet. Let things settle with the wedding, or they'll all worry, and Helen might get suspicious." Sophie's father agreed, coming up with a quick excuse. "Sophie went to New York a couple of days ago. There's a renowned doctor there. We wanted to ensure her health is in good hands, so she's resting over there." Engulfed in the sudden good news, they didn't doubt the story, even thinking Sophie might be handling the marriage discussions. Just as they were about to ask more, Helen returned, and they all fell silent. Jack and Noah, picking up the gifts, smiled as they approached her. "Here are the gifts, just for you. Go ahead and open them." The day Henry moved back home, Sophie received messages from Helen. Vacation videos, countless selfies, and a room full of gifts. "You're still in the hospital? What a shame. Can't see all the jewels and gifts my brothers got me." Then Jack and Noah chimed in too. "Sophie, got you something too. Open them when you get back. How's your health lately? During your hospital stay, I'll take good care of Auntie, Uncle, and Helen. We will all celebrate when you're back." But Sophie didn't reply to any of them. Going back, she knew she wasn't ever setting foot in Los Angeles again. She deleted all the messages, setting them to Do Not Disturb. Locking her phone, she took Angela's hand and returned to the lively hall. As she returned, Henry cleared a spot for her, next to him on the couch. Sophie wanted Angela to sit there, but the little girl refused, playfully running to her mom. "Mom said Sophie should sit with Henry and I shouldn't interrupt." Everyone in the living room burst into laughter, including Sophie, who was blushing and trying to remain calm as she sipped on her juice. Henry smiled slightly, glanced at Sophie, and changed the subject. "Angela, where did you learn that?" "I saw it on TV." Angela chirped. "Oh, Angela is so smart. No wonder you get perfect scores. Here, your gift for doing so well. See if you like it." Henry brought out a crystal ball with the Snow Queen on it. Angela's eyes widened with excitement as she bounced over. "Thank you, brother and sister. You're the best." Sophie hugged her, fixing her bangs, while Angela's mom started to praise Sophie. "You've got such good taste, Sophie, picking out something Angela loves. Henry here probably wouldn't have gotten it so right. Remember what he got last time? A study guide and a dance tutor?" Angela was so mad she didn't call him brother for 2 months. Sophie couldn't help glancing at Henry in surprise. In the past week, Jennifer had taken her to visit Henry often at the recovery home, and they spent time chatting about all kinds of things. Sophie thought Henry was genuinely polite, smart, and calm. Earlier that morning, while picking gifts, he noted everyone's preferences and suggested great options. Everyone was thrilled with what he picked out before dinner. She never imagined that, beneath his calm and composed exterior, there was this fun side to him. It really surprised her for a moment. Maybe Henry sensed her eyes on him, so he blinked, grinning as he protested his innocence. "I'm just fulfilling Angela's birthday wish of wanting to be first and perform at the Children's Day event, so I got these gifts ready. Angela, since you don't like them, I'll get you another present to make up for it, okay?" Angela looked at him skeptically, then jumped into Sophie's arms. "All right, but this time I want Sis to help pick it out and you just pay for it." Before Henry could reply, Sophie pinched Angela's chubby cheeks, agreeing on his behalf. "Deal, Sis. We'll pick the most expensive one to make it up to our darling Angela. Sis, I love you so much. Angela wishes you and Bro a happy wedding and a beautiful life together." The living room got even merrier. Everyone clapped and laughed. Even Sophie couldn't help but be amused by Angela's cheeky charm. Seeing the grin on her face sparked a little happiness in Henry's eyes, too. Over the next few weeks, while Henry was chilling at home, he and Sophie worked out all the wedding plans. They had everything sorted, from the rings and the dress to the candy and even their new house. The only thing still up in the air was the guest list and the invitations. The main holdup was that Sophie wasn't too keen on inviting her family, which was why things were stalled. Jennifer nudged her a couple of times until Sophie finally gave Henry a guest list, but she had cut out her parents, Jack, and Noah. Henry took a look without saying a word, his face staying the same. His chill attitude made Sophie nervous. She knew he was thorough and must have noticed something was off with the list, but he kept quiet and passed it to Larry to handle the invites. Worried about how to respond if Jennifer or Henry's folks asked, Sophie took her time before pulling Henry aside for a real talk. "Henry, I took a few people off the guest list," she confessed. Henry gave a knowing nod, his voice soft. I get it. This is our big day, and the guest list needs to feel right for you. If you're not feeling them there, it's cool with me. I'll talk to Grandma and Mom and Dad. Sophie was shocked. She didn't expect him to not ask any questions, already ready to handle any backlash himself. It left her feeling all kinds of ways. How are you going to explain it? She asked, her voice shaky. Seeing her doubt hurt Henry a bit. He'd been pissed after checking out the docs Larry showed him. Not because Sophie's family almost pulled off a bride swap stunt, but because they'd ignored their own daughter for some stranger, especially since that stranger was the girl Henry had wanted to marry since she was old enough. He understood how she felt better than anyone else. He couldn't hold it in and pulled her into a hug. Sophie, you've been in New York a minute and they haven't reached out. That says a lot about how they feel. I figured Grandma and my parents will see it too. You've said you love the vibe here and appreciate everyone's support. Since we got engaged, we've treated you like family, just waiting for you to grow up. No matter your past, since you chose New York and joined our crew, we've got your back, no matter what. Just leave the past behind and enjoy what you have now. The nightmare's over. So close to him, Sophie could feel his heartbeat. She hugged him back, her head on his chest, tears welling up. This time, she didn't hold back her mix of sadness, gratitude, and relief, letting them spill into tears. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, not sure how long passed before Sophie stopped crying and finally let go of her emotional baggage. By the time Noah and Jack noticed Sophie had been MIA for a while, it was late May. They'd both been tied up, staying close to Helen with no time for anything else. It wasn't until Jack saw the tulips in the backyard were gone that he wondered what was up. The housekeeper told him Sophie had organized the garden cleanup, and his face immediately darkened. He first thought his troublesome sister was acting up again, so he grabbed his phone to call her. But when he checked, she hadn't replied to any messages in a month. Anger bubbled up as he was about to find Noah when Noah, looking just as sour, came looking for him. Jack, do you know where Sophie is? She returned the family heirloom I gave her. When I checked the hospital, they said she was discharged already. Normally, no matter how much Sophie acted out to compete with Helen, she'd only sulk and wreck some stuff for a night. This outright rejection was new. A month gone by, not in the hospital, and seemingly vanished without a trace, not responding to anyone's messages. It had Jack and Noah seriously worried. They quickly asked Sophie's parents what was going on. At first, the couple tried to keep it on the down low, but eventually, under pressure, they shyly spilled the truth. We didn't call off the marriage to the Peer family. Sophie said she was down to marry Henry. We tried to convince her, but she wouldn't listen. Neither you nor Helen wanted her to marry him, so we eventually agreed. This bombshell left them stunned. They never thought Sophie's month-long disappearance was to set up a wedding. Noah, who grew up with Sophie, was way more freaked out than Jack. Before, he never thought she'd marry someone else. To him, past, present, or future, she was his. Noah couldn't handle it and tried to deny it. Uncle, Aunt, please don't joke about this. Sophie can't have agreed to marry Henry without even meeting him. We don't know what she's thinking. Maybe she saw how much you love Helen and wanted to make you both happy? As soon as he said this, Noah turned as white as a ghost. Jack, on the other hand, wasn't doing any better. He looked at Noah with a probing gaze. As they both got lost in their own thoughts, Helen walked in, totally unaware of the tension. Seeing everyone gathered, she was about to say hi when she noticed the gloom in the room, making her voice softer. What's going on? Seeing her, Jack jumped forward like he'd found a lifeline, grabbing her hand urgently. Helen, will you tell me in front of our parents? Who do you really like, me or Noah? Helen's face dropped, unsure how to respond. She was about to brush it off when she saw everyone staring at her expectantly. The room got super tense. Seeing her hesitate, Jack seemed to sense something and got even more urgent, like he desperately wanted to confirm his suspicions. Sophie's getting married, Helen. If you're gonna get hitched too, who would you choose, me or Noah? Helen was stuck with this tough choice. She glanced at Noah, looking hopeless, then at Jack, who seemed about to lose it, and bit her lip, looking troubled. To me, Jack and Noah are both equally important, she said. If I could, I wouldn't want to marry either. I just want to stay by both of your sides. Noah breathed a sigh of relief at her answer, but Jack's face turned even more sour. Sophie was his sister, and eventually, she or someone else would get married. But Helen was different. She wasn't blood related, and he genuinely loved her and wanted to be with her. Helen's ambiguous answer felt like a rejection to him. He was about to say more, but Helen suddenly looked shocked and asked, Sophie's getting married? To whom? When did this happen? Why didn't I hear about it? Sophie's parents hesitated but finally told her about the arranged marriage, leaving out the bride swap detail. When she heard Sophie's fiancé was comatose, Helen almost burst out laughing, barely keeping up a worried facade. Did she really agree, marrying someone who's bedridden? Isn't that like becoming a widow? That's too sad, she said, trying to hide a smile. Noah's already fragile heart sank at her words. Would Sophie rather choose someone in a vegetative state than stay with him? He snapped, losing his cool. I don't agree. Sophie can't marry into the Purr family. Where is she? I want to find her. Helen looked up sharply, her expression changing. Noah, if my sister's okay with it, why are you trying to stop it? Sophie's parents nodded in agreement. Helen's right. The Person family in New York is prestigious. It might be tough for Sophie, but she won't be mistreated. Seeing the three of them agree, Noah tried to reason with them. But Sophie's our daughter, raised comfortably. She can't take care of someone comatose. Weren't we supposed to? Before he could spill the truth, Jack interrupted, anxious. It was decided from the start Sophie would marry. You can't back out. The Purr family is top-notch, and Helen, being adopted, would get judged if she replaced her. Noah felt a chill as he listened, finally getting how ignored Sophie had felt all those years. Helen, tearing up, complained, Exactly, why should I take on Sophie's marriage? Noah, if you say this, I won't talk to you anymore. As Helen ran off crying, her family followed to comfort her, leaving Noah standing alone. Clenching his fists, he quickly called his secretary. The next day, they reported back. Noah, Miss Sophie is at the Purr family's house, and the wedding is tomorrow, the secretary informed him. Making his heart race, he immediately booked the next flight to New York, bombarding Sophie with calls and texts to cancel the wedding. But there was no response. Before boarding, Helen showed up at the airport, furious and blocking Noah. If you go to New York, we can't be in touch anymore. Noah focused solely on Sophie. He couldn't handle her tantrum. Helen, Sophie's your sister too. We grew up together. How can I just watch her make such a mistake? I don't care. If you leave today, I'm done with you, she cried. The boarding call echoed, and Noah, out of patience, brushed past her. Helen screamed, frustrated beyond caring about appearances, breaking down right there. Jack, arriving in a hurry, held her tightly. As Noah walked away, Helen yelled after him, Noah, if you go to Sophie, then I'll marry Jack. Noah paused, turning back. Helen was in Jack's happy embrace, looking at him with sheer desperation. He knew her stubborn side. Out of spite, she could totally go through with it. But the thought of Sophie marrying someone else bothered him more. He made up his mind in seconds. Helen, give me a day. We can talk about this after I bring Sophie back to LA. Helen's face turned pale as her anger took over, biting her lip hard. Jack kept comforting her, but she was set. She took his hand and headed outside the airport. Jack, let's go talk to my parents and undo the adoption, then get married. When he realized she wasn't joking, Jack was momentarily stunned. But after the shock passed, he was filled with joy and hurriedly took her home. Sophie's parents were thrilled when they heard the news and quickly handled the paperwork. Once they got the marriage certificate, their adopted daughter became their daughter-in-law, and they were over the moon. They wanted to share the news with Sophie. When they called and told her, Sophie's response was pretty indifferent. She just said, Her parents weren't happy with her attitude and started to complain. How can you be like this? Your brother's getting married and you're not even going to congratulate him? Helen's going to be your sister-in-law and you're not even going to congratulate her? Helen's going to be your sister-in-law, so you better not bully her like before. Bully Helen? Hearing this, Sophie found it hilarious. But she was about to head to the wedding rehearsal and wasn't in the mood to argue, so that she gave a dismissive reply. I wish them a happy marriage, living long and prosperously, having kids soon, and loving each other forever. Is that enough? Her parents felt slightly appeased and then asked about her wedding date. Looking at the romantic sea of roses in the hall, Sophie's eyes narrowed a bit and randomly picked a date. 2 weeks from now. All right, we'll attend with your brother and sister-in-law. Make sure to send the invitations. The MC was already testing the microphone, and Sophie casually ended the call. It was cool in the hall, and Henry, who had been waiting, took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, speaking softly. You've had a long day. We need to get up early tomorrow. Let's run through the rehearsal once and then go home to rest. Sophie was indeed a bit exhausted and nodded in agreement. After the rehearsal, it was already 4 p.m. They walked out of the hotel hand in hand, still chatting about what to eat for dinner when they heard a familiar voice. Sophie, why didn't you tell me you were getting married? Looking up, Sophie saw Noah. He rushed over, trying to separate them. Henry quickly stepped in to protect her, and when Noah saw this, his eyes turned cold. Who are you? I'm looking for Sophie, so move aside. It was their first time meeting, but the tension was already thick. Sophie had no clue why Noah suddenly showed up, but she didn't want Henry dragged into her past drama, so she held onto his hand. Henry, can you wait for me in the car? I'll be right back. Hearing that name, Noah's expression changed. Henry? Wasn't he in a coma? How is he awake? It's only been a month, and you're already close. Is she really trying to marry into the Pear family? While he was lost in thought, Sophie had already sent Henry off and was staring intently at Noah. I didn't invite you to my wedding. Why are you here? Noah's face darkened at her words. Your parents are my uncle and aunt. Jack is your brother, and Helen is your sister. We've known each other for over 20 years. Sophie, how can you say that? Sophie let out a soft laugh, eyes sparkling with irony. Oh, really? Isn't Helen their real daughter? Their sister? Didn't she grow up with you? Hearing her sarcasm, Noah felt a wave of guilt and hurriedly tried to explain. Sophie, why are you competing with Helen? We did favor her, but that was because she was supposed to marry into the Purr family on your behalf. We just wanted to make it up to her. Remember, we used to love you just the same before she came along. Blaming Helen had become a tired theme, and Sophie's ears were sick of hearing it. She looked at him mentioning Helen and coldly responded, After tomorrow, I have nothing to do with you guys. Go compensate whoever you want. I don't care, nor do I want to hear your rubbish. You're jumping into a pit out of spite. Sophie, is it worth it? Please calm down and come back to Elderday with me. I assure you what happened before will never happen again. In his haste, Noah tried to grab her hand. Sophie stepped back, putting distance between them. I don't need it, nor do I want it. I won't set foot in Elderday ever again. Please, just go. Her firm and cold tone left Noah with no hope, just a brewing sense of anger and disappointment. You're really gonna burn this bridge, leaving no room for yourself? Leaving no room? Sophie chuckled. I have no bridges left to burn. Going home might lead to unknown paths or even a pit, but never a safe route. She looked away and focused on Henry, who was watching from a distance. Her heart settled. This path should be left for Helen, or rather Jack's wife now. Seeing Noah's flustered reaction to the mention of Jack's wife, Sophie suddenly found it amusing. I heard Jack and Helen got married. Do me a favor and tell them that I'm not inviting them to my wedding. And they don't need to invite me to theirs. From now on, we all walk our separate paths. With that, Sophie turned and left without looking back. Noah was left flustered and lost. He pulled out his phone to confirm with Jack and saw Helen's recent post. Cheers to the rest of our lives. Beneath were pictures of her and Jack, both holding their marriage certificate. That photo left Noah stunned. He thought he could bring Sophie back today, explain things to Helen, and everything would go back to normal. But things had twisted entirely. Now, one was about to marry into the Pear family, and the other had already married Jack. He lost both. On the ride back, the car was quiet. Henry didn't ask questions, absorbed in texting Larry about the wedding arrangements. After spending the last month together, Sophie knew he was just being polite, never prying into her personal life. Previously, she chose silence because revisiting those memories felt unbearable. Now, seeing him busy with wedding preparations, she felt he deserved to know some things. So, after dinner and some rest, Sophie sought him out and laid bare her past to him. Maybe she had truly let it go. When she talked, there was no emotion in her heart, and her tone was flat, like she was telling someone else's story. But when Henry heard her mention these old things, he felt a pang of heartache. He squeezed her hand tightly, the warmth in his palm transferring through her skin. "I know you've moved on," he said, "but thank you for sharing your past with me. While I was asleep for 5 years, you were suffering too. Now it's all in the past, and we're together again. From now on, you've got me." For once, Sophie didn't cry. She looked at the wedding photo on the table, and for the first time, she really looked forward to a wedding. They cuddled close, cherishing the rare moment of peace. Then, the moment was shattered by Sophie's phone buzzing nonstop. It was Noah. He was calling and texting like crazy. "Sophie, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Can you forgive me and give me another chance? I'm sorry. Can you forgive me and give me another chance? Don't marry Henry, okay? You don't actually like him. You're just mad at me, right? You promised once you'd be my bride, remember?" Sophie read through them, finding it all pretty unbelievable. Henry beside her didn't take it to heart, thinking this guy was a bit odd. According to what Sophie had said, they both liked each other, but never talked about it openly. He should like her. But when Helen showed up, he became indecisive and slowly leaned towards her. Now that Sophie was getting married, he suddenly acted regretful and tried to apologize. In his heart, what did he really think of Sophie? And Helen? Sophie had pondered this for a long time too. Before, she couldn't understand why people could be so fickle. But now, she saw through her so-called family and Noah, and spoke softly. "In my family's eyes, even though I'm related by blood, I'm just a daughter destined to be married off. So, no matter how much they loved me as a child, when I reached the age to marry, they saw me as an outsider." Then Helen appeared, filling the empty daughter role, pleasing them in every way. When Jack took a liking to her, they assumed she'd marry him and made her part of the family, hence the favoritism. As for Noah, maybe he did like me and Helen, but ultimately, he loves himself the most. He thought I'd always wait for him, and that Helen would choose him over Jack without a doubt. So he swayed back and forth, just to enjoy the feeling of being desired by two women. And now that he's left with nothing, he's unwilling to let go. So he's putting on this act of remorse. Sophie got straight to the point, and silence followed. She turned to find Henry messaging Larry. "Double the security for tomorrow's wedding. Anyone who causes trouble gets escorted out. No exceptions." At noon, the private wedding officially kicked off. Although no reporters were allowed, word had already spread, and some photos taken outside the hotel hit the press. Henry recovering, weds business heiress today. Jack, miles away in Los Angeles, froze when he saw this news. Henry's awake? Why didn't Sophie tell us? His parents had said their wedding would be in 2 weeks. So why the news today? If they were really marrying today, why weren't family invited? Confused, Jack reached out to Sophie, hoping to get some answers, only to find he'd been blocked. Shocked and angry but helpless due to the distance, he contacted Noah, who had just flown to New York. As soon as he got through, he heard a commotion. Noah sounded aggravated, arguing with a group of people. "What's going on? Did you find Sophie? The news says she's getting married today, and she didn't even tell the family. Plus, she blocked me." Noah, also blocked, was outside the hotel, trying to push past security to crash the wedding. He loosened his tie, irritated. "Yeah, it's today. She's still mad and didn't plan on inviting any of you. She even said she'll cut ties from now on." If Noah's tone wasn't so bitter, Jack might have thought he was joking. Sophie, sever ties with them? No way. They share the same blood and have doted on her for over 20 years. Now that she's married, that's it? What nonsense. Fuming, Jack booked 4 tickets and took his family to New York to get some answers. When they arrived, Noah was still stuck outside, sporting a fresh bruise. Sophie's family looked even more upset seeing him like this. Sophie's dad stormed to the security guards, acting all high and mighty. "We're the bride's family. Let us in." The guards exchanged looks, sizing them up, then repeated their orders. "All guests need to show invitations to enter. Please present yours." Sophie's family had none, of course. Jack's anger boiled over at their stubbornness. Have Sophie come out and see if she doesn't recognize her parents, brother and sister-in-law, and someone from her family too. How can they not invite the bride's family to such a big occasion? Helen, who tagged along just to enjoy the drama, chimed in mockingly. And she's the actual daughter? Treating her family like this? How ungrateful. After arguing for hours, Noah was hoarse. Hearing what was said, a flash of annoyance crossed his mind, and he gave her a long look. The security guards, oblivious to who they were, decided to avoid conflict and change their approach. Doesn't matter who you are, no invitation means no entry. Besides, the wedding and reception are pretty much over. The bride and groom likely have already left, and we certainly can't trouble such important people for you. If you're family, why not just contact the bride directly? It was only then that the group noticed it was already 3 p.m. The security guard had a point, so the 5 of them left the hotel and headed to the Per family estate. After toiling for over half a month, Jennifer felt a huge relief now that the wedding had gone smoothly. On the way back, just as she was about to rest her eyes, some commotion caught her attention. Frowning, she glanced out the window as the butler approached, having gotten the whole scoop. Jennifer, a group of people showed up outside the villa about half an hour ago, claiming to be Sophie's family and demanding to see you. Sophie's family. At the mention, Jennifer's mood soured, reminded of what Henry had told her. The joyful expression on her face faded. Matt and Kate, sitting with her, also had their faces drop as they got out of the car alongside Jennifer. From a distance, Sophie's parents spotted the elder they hadn't seen for years. Their arrogance vanished instantly. As they came closer, they dared not continue their previous antics and simply called out, "Aunt." Jennifer gave them a sweeping glance that screamed authority despite her silence. "I'm just an old woman, hardly worthy of being called an aunt by you." Hearing such a rebuke from someone they grew up respecting, Sophie's parents turned pale, nervously explaining, "You misunderstand. We just heard Sophie and Henry got married today and wanted to know why we didn't get an invite. You seriously have the nerve to ask about the invitations? Don't you understand that no invite means you're not welcome?" Faced with such a severe scolding, Sophie's family and Noah didn't dare say a word. But Helen, unfamiliar with the stature of the Per family, couldn't take the insult and fired back on the spot. "Sophie is our biological daughter. It's ridiculous she got married without inviting her closest family. And let's not forget, Henry is a vegetable. Our family didn't call off the engagement to save face, so the least you could do is be grateful." Sophie's parents were horrified by her outburst and hurried to cover her mouth. Unfortunately, they were too slow, and the Per family heard every word. Though Jennifer didn't recognize her, she guessed that must be the adopted daughter. Seeing Helen's ignorant and arrogant demeanor, Jennifer scoffed coldly. "So this is the new daughter you've raised? If your grandfather knew you mistreated his cherished granddaughter for such a rude and foolish girl, he'd likely be furious enough to rise from the grave." Sensing his mother's genuine anger, Matt stepped forward, looking disappointed in the family he once knew. "Our two families were supposed to unite as promised by Uncle and my mother 2 decades ago. 5 years ago, when Henry had his accident, we suggested calling off the engagement. But you refused to avoid public criticism. Out of respect for past ties, we began planning the wedding the moment Henry woke up to show our sincerity. But behind our backs, you adopted a daughter intending to swap brides, and mistreated your biological daughter for her. We haven't even held you accountable for such betrayal and breach of propriety, yet you dare come here and provoke us?" Sophie's family hadn't expected that their bride swap plan was already exposed, turning ashen in fear. Jack, aware of the gravity, tried to come up with an excuse. Before he could speak, Sophie hurried over, having received the urgent message. Once her family saw her, they immediately redirected their pent-up anger towards her and began their scolding. "Sophie, how could you not inform your family about something as big as your wedding? Do you even remember your own name? Just because you suffered minor injuries and we were busy, you give us attitude. How could you talk behind our backs to Aunt Jennifer and Matt? We've raised you for nothing." Witnessing her family's true colors firsthand, Henry finally understood what Sophie had endured. He clasped her hand, positioned her behind him for protection, and met their furious gazes with steely calmness. "Sophie is now part of the Per family and has nothing more to do with you." Seeing the intimacy between the two, Sophie's family quickly realized this was Henry. Being chastised by a junior in public, Sophie's parents were resentful, but could only suppress their pride in Jennifer's presence to argue logically. She may change her last name, but she still carries our blood. We have every right to discipline her. As Henry prepared to respond, Sophie stopped him with a gentle shake of her head. Then she stepped forward and faced her family, now so foreign to her. Why should I change my name? My grandpa gave me my name, and the marriage to the Purr family was his arrangement. What does that have to do with you? Your daughter, Jack's sister, was killed 45 days ago when your beloved Helen ran her over with a car. All the feelings I had for you guys were completely cut off that day. If you think I'm ungrateful, try kneeling at Grandpa's grave first and see if he forgives all you've done over the years. Sophie's parents were so furious their faces reddened, and they lifted a hand to point at her, ready to scold. But Jennifer's angry shout cut them off. Enough already. This is New York, and Sophie is the granddaughter-in-law of the Purr family. Who do you think you are to act this way here? Matt caught his mom's look and understood what she meant. He called the bodyguards over, who quickly surrounded the group. Seeing that they were about to be kicked out, Helen couldn't hold her anger and started blurting out nonsense. What's the big deal? Think you're special? In Los Angeles, our family is just as influential. If you're going to be this heartless, we don't need any more dealings with you in the future. Hearing this, Noah, who had stayed silent all along, couldn't hide his shock. Sophie's family widened their eyes in disbelief at her words. Henry glanced at her, his voice icy and unwavering. As you wish, from this day forward, the Purr family is cutting all ties with them and will make it known across the industry that our two companies will never collaborate again. Following orders, Larry led the group, driven out by the bodyguards, away from the villa. After that chaos, peace returned to the villa's entrance. Seeing Sophie lower her eyes with a guilty expression, the Purr family members all softened their anger and surrounded her to comfort her warmly. It's okay, Sophie. With me around, no one's gonna hurt you. We all know it's not your fault. Don't be upset. Today is your wedding day. Don't let them ruin it for you. Cheer up. Seeing everyone worried for her, Sophie forced a small smile, but the tears in her eyes betrayed her. Henry, understanding how she felt, wrapped his arm around her shoulders and took her home. Once in the car, she fell into his arms, crying and repeatedly apologizing. I'm sorry, I didn't handle my personal matters well and ended up troubling you and Grandma. This time, Henry didn't let her finish. He interrupted her. Sophie, you're my wife now. Your business is my business and the Purr family's business. Grandma stepped in for the family, so you don't need to apologize. As for cutting ties with your parents, Dad and Grandma decided that last night. Those partnerships only existed because of the marriage alliance. They couldn't even treat their daughter right, so how could they be trusted in business? Ending it quickly was just avoiding future trouble and saving losses. Don't blame yourself for everything, okay? Understanding the reasons, Sophie felt a bit better and didn't shed any more tears. Henry gently wiped the remaining tears from her face with a tissue, his actions incredibly tender. Seeing the concern in his eyes, Sophie's heart softened a bit, and she couldn't help asking him one question. We've only known each other for a month. Are you so good to me because you've already decided I'd become your wife? Henry paused, his fingers gently brushing her forehead, his expression softening as he spoke quietly. It's not just a month we've known each other. It's just that you only remember this month. I've known you for a long time, Sophie. Before you turned 7, my life only had you. When our parents were busy and Jack was just a year older than you, I looked after you. I watched you grow from a little girl who fit in my palm, trailing behind me, calling me brother. The day I left Los Angeles, you cried until you were hoarse, insisting on coming with me. I promised you back then that I'd return for you someday. I failed to keep that promise until now, but still, you came back to me in the end. So much time had passed that Sophie couldn't recall things from when she was 3 or 4 years old, but seeing his determined gaze, she knew he was telling the truth. In those forgotten moments, she did have a brother she adored. Although distance separated them later, he never forgot her or broke his promise. By the time they returned to their newlywed home, it was already dark, and lights were on everywhere. Sophie had heard Jennifer mention before that Henry bought the villa with the first money he ever earned. He personally designed and chose everything inside. This home, empty for 5 years, now finally welcomed its mistress. Henry guided her through every corner, inside and out. When you were little, you said you wanted a big garden filled with your favorite flowers, roses, lilies, and so many more. Check it out now and see if I missed anything. You loved drawing on my clothes and face with markers, and said when you became a great artist, you'd paint a portrait of me. Even if I don't know if you're still into painting, I still got you an art studio. There was a time you were all about learning the piano and begged me daily to teach you. You said one day we'd play a duet together. To fulfill that dream, I've been learning, even though I haven't played in 5 years. My skills are rusty now, so I need to practice. As he talked about the past, the emptiness in Sophie's heart slowly filled up. She watched their shadows intertwine on the ground, her eyes misting with happiness. No rush. We have plenty of time now to play piano, paint, swing, and decorate our home together. The news of the Purr family cutting ties with Sophie's parents spread fast, shocking everyone in the circle. After all, the marriage alliance wasn't too long ago. Everyone was curious about what could have made Henry so angry right after waking up. Rumors began circulating that Sophie's parents were mistreating their daughter in favor of an adopted one, sparking Henry's fierce response to protect his wife. Favoring sons over daughters was common in their circle, but treating your own child poorly to benefit another was unheard of, so word spread quickly. There was also renewed interest in the messy birthday party affair a few months ago, and the rumors that Sophie's car accident was deliberate. People who loved gossip put all these pieces together, and anyone who read it had nothing but disdain to express. In a flash, their reputation plummeted. To avoid getting caught up in all the drama and gaining a bad rep, all the families in Los Angeles cut ties with Sophie's parents. After the Purr family made their stance clear, many businesses trying to curry favor with them also stopped their partnerships. Several projects got canceled halfway, the group's cash flow dried up, stock prices tanked, and they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Sophie's parents were desperate, but they couldn't secure loans or sponsorships, so they had to sell their car and home assets. But given the avalanche that hit the group, this was just a drop in the bucket. Facing a dead end, Sophie's mom suddenly remembered the dowry they had saved for her. They pulled out those bank cards and went to the bank, only to be told by the manager that the money had been transferred to a charity account months ago. Unwilling to let it go, they caused a scene at the charity. The next day, the charity head reported the incident to the media and even publicized Sophie's donation. Once the news hit the headlines, their situation worsened. Sophie's parents and Jack were furious, but lacked the means to confront the Purr family. They thought about swallowing their pride to seek out Sophie, but despite pulling all connections, they couldn't find her. As the three were swearing out of desperation, the police showed up. We received a report from Miss Sophie. Helen is suspected of attempted murder, and we must detain her for questioning according to legal procedures. We ask for your cooperation. Sophie's family's last nerve snapped at that moment, especially Jack, who refused to believe it, and when he obstructed the investigation, he got detained himself. The police searched around but couldn't find anyone. Only then did Sophie's parents notice Helen had rarely been seen since the incident. Afraid she might harm herself, they enlisted relatives and servants to search for her. Finally, the police and Sophie's family found Helen at a bar. She was by Noah's side, who was dead drunk, crying her heart out. "Noah, I never really liked Jack. I was always into you. If you hadn't ditched me at the airport that day, it would have been you I married. You know you care for me. My family's fallen now. Nobody can take me in. You're all I've got left." On the day Helen was convicted, it snowed for the first time in New York. Sophie had mostly lived in the South and rarely saw such heavy snow, so she was over the moon. She dragged Angela into a snowball fight in the garden, leaving the little girl pouting and throwing a tantrum at Henry, who was watching. "Birds of a feather flock together. My sister has been hanging out with you for too long, and that's why she's not as nice to me as before. It's all your fault." The little girl tossed snowballs at him. He thought to dodge at first, but seeing Sophie laugh so hard she nearly doubled over, he let Angela hit him. Once she stormed into the living room, he walked to his wife, surrendering his frozen red hands to her warmth. Sophie coughed a few times, trying to act serious. "Angela's right. It's all your fault for corrupting me. I used to be so gentle and lovely. How could I bully a 10-year-old otherwise?" Henry nodded vigorously, accepting everything she said without question. "Yeah, it's my fault. I'm the one to blame. However you want to punish me, It's your call. Seeing his earnest confession, Sophie was quite pleased. She slipped the secret snowball she'd hidden in her palm into his shirt, grinning mischievously. The chill ran down his neck, making Henry shiver. As he admired her triumphant smile, he sighed lightly. It's not me corrupting you. I think Angela's corrupted you. Now you two gang up on me, I've got no defense. While he was lamenting, Kate came out holding Angela, followed by the whole family, teasing him with laughter. You deserve to be bullied, being the oldest here. Exactly, an actual sister and wife. Of course you should be bullied by them both. The yard's atmosphere instantly perked up. With reinforcements by her side, Sophie snorted at him. Her phone beeped a few times from her pocket, and she pulled her warmed hands back in. It turned out it was gossip from her friend group chat. Did you see the news? Helen's going to jail. I feel so uplifted. Noah drank himself into a gastric hemorrhage and got hospitalized. Rumor has it he might have stomach cancer. If only that weren't false. Their families hit rock bottom. Word is they're living in a slum. The old man had a stroke from rage, the old lady cried herself blind, and Jack's working 3 jobs a day just to cover their medical bills. If you ask me, they totally deserve it. Don't you dare go soft on them. Seeing her friend's heartfelt advice, Sophie quickly reassured them. It wasn't until I was 18 that I learned I was trapped in an arranged marriage. Noticing her hand turning red from the cold wind again, Henry quickly got her a hand warmer, speaking gently. Gossiping with your girlfriends again? Haven't been ratting me out, have you? Sophie gave him the stink eye and tossed her phone right at him. So what if I am? You finished the cream puffs I worked so hard on last time. Angela didn't even get a taste. Don't you deserve a scolding? Angela, ready with a snow pile for revenge, heard this and got red in the face with anger. Henry, how old are you? Stealing a kid's snacks. I'll get you for this. Henry was too slow to dodge and got a face full of snow. He moved over to Sophie, resting his head on her shoulder. Honey, control your accomplice, Angela. She's learned to sneak attack. Give back my cream puffs. Sis, move aside. No running away. Amidst all the laughter and chaos, the sky began to snow again, coating everything in a pristine white blanket.